Everybody, it's Jim here. Welcome back to the Audiomo Podcast, episode number 17. We only got a few topics to go over today, but there's some meat on those bones. So, David, how are you doing tonight?
Well, pretty good. It's been a long week, but it's always a long week.
I was going to say, it's never easy. It's not like we have easy weeks. We have kids.
Yeah, young kids. It's never easy. Yeah.
But I have to commend you. You, on very short notice, I messaged you at like 6 p.m. on Saturday, and I said, could you do a small mix for me? Nothing major. I think it was like 5 or 6 guitar tracks, 4 drum tracks, and a bass track. And you were like, yeah, I can get it done. And you had it back to me at like 11:15. So that was very impressive. So what I wanted to start on was that when you had the session with you, what did you think of the guitar tones? Were there any one that really stood out to you and you're like, oh, that sounds pretty good?
So the session was cool. It was a little bit different than normal, only in the sense that the drums were like right there pretty much out the gate. So I could definitely tell that there was a big improvement with your overheads, which was cool. I know that we had talked about that, and I think you tossed some money back into that, and it paid off because I had to do way less to the overheads to make them work, which was cool. Guitar tones wise, I think everything actually sounded really great out the gate. I'm pretty impressed with the drive. I didn't really know anything about the Optimist going in, right? I didn't get a chance to watch your video on it and hadn't really heard anything about it. So I assumed with it being a Corey Wong pedal that it was probably going to be on the lighter side, but you got some heavy stuff out of it, which was pretty cool. And I think worked really nicely. The center lead, the lead thing that you had kind of going through the majority of the first half was like on the brighter side, but I really think those kinds of things are all tweakable once you get into a mix anyway. And, you got to see how everything sits together. And, I do a lot of stuff, particularly to the bass, right? Which completely changes up sort of sonically how that's going to sit with the guitar and then with the drums. And it's like, you never know how those things are going to shape out until you start to actually shape them. So, guitar tones were super cool. I definitely dig from the heavy side. They had that kind of like 90s sort of throaty kind of thing going on, which was really cool. Yeah, man, it was fun to work on. It was super quick because it already sounded pretty good,
It was very easy. It's funny. There's 2 things I want to touch on that you said. The first is those Lawton Audio small condenser microphones that I use for overheads. I noticed it even when I listened back. I was just like, I don't really necessarily think I need Dave to do this, but it's one of those things where it's fun to send you something, and then it gives us something else to talk about that's a little more than just, oh, this new guitar, that kind of stuff on here. So definitely it was a gigantic improvement. If you have a set of drums, investing in a decent set of overheads, like we've said in the past, definitely well worth it. But going back to why you thought it sounded bright, I forgot to change that setting. What I did was, originally I was going to be playing that part on channel 2 on the Ex Robato, which had humbuckers. So it was set to compensate for that. But I was in such a hurry to finish the track, I played the part on the Jag, and afterwards I was like, oh, it's so bright. So it's really funny that you picked up on that. But I thought that was, it's still tweakable, like you said, but it's definitely the second channel with the tone knob, even in the middle, is really, really, really like focused more towards the upper mids and the highs.
Yeah, so I definitely noticed that there was some brightness there, but it's nothing unmanageable, right? I mean, it easily could have been taken down in the mix afterwards, could have been taken down on the amp or whatever. It was purely a usable drive. It's just a little bit bright, especially in the context of everything together. I mean, I think I did like maybe a 3 dB cut, at maybe like 10K, something like that. But definitely, not in the realm of unusable by any stretch.
Yeah, I think it's right out of the box. If you dial it in just a little bit per guitar, my mistake, like I said, was I had it dialed in for a different guitar, but I was in a rush and I'm foolish sometimes. But overall, I was really happy with it. And again, my big surprise was the same as yours. When I plugged the Les Paul into the Mesa, I was thinking at first I was going to use it on top of the gain channel that the Mesa had, but this thing had more than enough gain to really hit the point home of like, you can get serious drive out of it, like as it was. And I was really impressed with that.
Yeah, it was a super cool type of gain too. Like I always am trying to find kind of those really like I said, throaty kind of low end bass gains. To be honest with you, this is a really embarrassing admittance for myself, but I don't really like understand the Dumble tone. I feel like every time I've heard like a Dumble, like the fabled Dumble drive or whatever. Like they all sound kind of different to me, and I don't really know what that is supposed to mean. But I always imagine it's supposed to be like that low end, grumbly kind of like, it almost has that drive feel where it's like kind of erupting from the guitar, or like you can tell it's pushing past breakup as opposed to being like distortion on top of whatever you're playing. And I assume that's what the Dumble drive is supposed to sound like, right? It's supposed to be that supernatural like breakup low end thing, although I might be completely wrong. Maybe the Dumble's supposed to be like the ultimate high end distortion. I don't know. Every time I heard it, it sounds totally different.
Yeah, those are not consistent amps in that sense. There's a lot of variance from one to one, and it's one of those tones that, thankfully for my wallet, I have not been like obsessed with, if that makes any sense. So I've never chased it. The only really high-end amp that I would love to own one day, well, actually there's two. I would love to own a matchless. That would be really cool. And I would love to own a 2-Rock for cleans.
Yeah. Those are good choices. This is now turned into a totally different question, but
so let's do it. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna add in one more before you go. For gain, I would get the Soldano.
I think I agree with you on the matchless. Honestly, I think that's like one of the top tiers, right? That's the white whale. This is a matchless for a reasonable price.
So give me 3 that you would pick.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna go matchless. I want a Mesa of some kind. I think for me, maybe a single rec is kind of like, like the dream. And I just never want to spend Mesa money on a nice Mesa. And then I think like an AC30 or an AC15 head. And those are like mostly, other than the matchless, mostly obtainable. Just ones I've never like pulled the trigger on spending the money on,
Yeah, I would recommend, if you're we're playing Theory Fighter right now, meaning, obviously not things we're going to be buying in the near future. We're talking about wish list stuff. If I was going to go the AC kind of sound, I'd go for the Morgan, the AC20. That thing is so refined and is just, it's amazing in person. You would love it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm definitely willing to be swayed on them. I feel like they're all amps I'm never in a room with, right? Like they're just amps that I've heard over the years. Like, and the same thing with the Dumble thing, right? Like I'm talking about even Dumble consistency from amp to amp. I probably only heard one Dumble amp, right? And like I've heard a million things pretending to be Dumbles, but they're even less consistent than the Dumble to a Dumble. You know what I mean?
Well, clones are similar to me in that sense, where I think I've heard maybe 4 or 5 of them for real, like in real life, and then like, I don't know, 1,000 clon type or clon based kind of circuits. So it kind of clouds everything at that point.
Yeah. And to me, like, especially with the clon, like when you say clon from a recording standpoint, I always just think like, oh, you want like a transparent overdrive. And there's so many other overdrives that also do that, that I don't really care if it's a clon or not, It's just like to me, it's always like, do you want something clon-like or something Tubescreamer-like, right? Do you need something to tighten up the low end, or you want to keep the low end? And, like, that's it. I don't care if it's a clon or not. I just care if it's going to keep the low end.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I've never gotten along with Tubescreamers, because they boost the mids, and it's something that I don't particularly like on Strats and Telecasters. So those have been my bread and butter guitars for, decades. So it's not one of those sounds that I really went after. I've still never owned an Ibanez Tubescreamer. I find that almost criminal.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. That you wouldn't use a Tubescreamer on top of a Tele or a Strat, right? Like, why add more mids, and to a guitar that already doesn't have enough bass, in my opinion. But, for me, like, doing the Tubescreamer thing is step number 1 for a high gain tone, right? You just crank a Tubescreamer. It's the first thing you do. So
yeah, and primarily you play humbucker guitars, so it kind of makes sense. But I know some people will be listening to this like, you're both idiots, because I use Tubescreamers with my Strats and my Teles. It's my go-to, and there's a lot of people who did that. It's just not a tone that I necessarily kind of liked. That's all.
Yeah, and I definitely think it depends on the Tubescreamer too, right? I mean, I think like the TS9 works better for it. I'm the Tubescreamer purist. I just like the classic like Max and 808 styles, but yeah, we definitely are both idiots, and there's definitely other opinions than ours, but I just always, think like, hey, if it's not working, I just throw a tube screamer and it sounds a little bit better always,
Well, that's my other problem. There's too many damn tube screamers. I don't know which is which. I don't know which is the variables. I just want the good one. I tried the hand wired high end 808 reissue. One of my buddies had it, and I wasn't really blown away by that either. And I was like, this is supposed to be like the one. Just it's just not for me. It's just not my kind of tone. I just decided. So, I mean, whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah, it's weird too because like, and especially in the tube screamer world, like most of what I care about a tube screamer is that small EQ change and pushing the preamp with volume. So like I have multiple tube screamers, and they're all pretty much the same style, but I pretty much don't use any gain on any of them. So it's just like different flavors of slight EQ changes. Like, so I have the 808, the Maxon 808, which is just like the generic, like it just does exactly what you think a tube screamer is going to do. And then I have like the Nano Drive, which is not a tube screamer at all, but I use it like a tube screamer because I just have the volume cranked, and then it changes like compression and tone basically. And then I have like a clear one that just looks cool, but I'm pretty sure it's just an 808, but it's just, it looks better and it's a little less noisy. And then I have like a JHS, it's the Moonshine, I think, which is basically a drive pedal, but it has a blend. So like if I want gain and clean at the same time, I can do that. But they all sound identical to me, basically, when I'm using them like a tube screamer. So I don't know. I think most of it's BS, to be honest.
That's so much gear for no reason, to me at least. Like, I can see why you would do it, especially because you have so much gain staging going on depending on where you are in a song. But I think that's part of the reason I've grown to love this pedal more the more I've had it, the Optimist, because it gives me exactly what I want. The problem is, talking about having multiples, I could easily see myself having two. One set up specifically for having channel one kind of like as a light overdrive, and then one where it's just like more straight up full high gain, because it could do both so well, and it's not like a setting where I can save it or have it programmable via MIDI. But I mean, so I'm in trouble. If they make a limited edition that's not the limited edition they have now, because they look almost identical. If they make like a sparkle green one, I'll probably buy that because I'm an idiot. But that's an expensive pedal to buy twice. It was like, that'd be like $700 if I was to buy both of them.
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised. You would think with a dual channel thing, like it would have an external switcher, jack or something like that to pop between the two. Does it? Or is it the shared EQ that's the problem?
No, you could pop between the two, but you can't change the gain settings on like channel one. You know what I mean? So it has the support to be able to do that if you wanted to have a foot switch. So like if your pedal is too far away and you wanted something closer to like accessibility on your pedal board itself. But as far as being able to have multiple versions of like drive, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's a bummer. And you find those like workhorse pedals, which are, I mean, it would be perfect for me in the studio. I don't care if it switches between the two. But yeah, I would agree. I do have too many tube screamers and they all really sound the same. So I don't know why I have so many of them, and especially as we were going through tracking and I was doing ramping and stuff and kind of going like, man, I really wish I had more sounds. I'm like looking at my 4 fucking drive pedals going like, why do I have this many drive pedals? And I don't have like another fuzz that sounds different. Like I need another fuzz. Like I need a fuzz that has like really gross top end for like some of those really nasty like overlay things that I just need something in a frequency range that sounds nothing like anything else I have going on, and I don't have enough of those.
I have a good recommendation for you. If you want an over-the-top fuzz that will not sound like anything else you have on your board. I'm sorry, I was so excited to tell you about this. I was like, oh, I'm going to cut them off. And I can't see you right now. They don't know that. But
yeah.
It's called the Fuzzy Cat. It's made by Fuzz E Cat. It's made by Paradox Effects there in Tijuana, who was about 15 minutes south of where I was in San Diego when I was living there. That thing, it's like, it has a bunch of different modes on it, but one of them is like this super hairy, just like, it's like if that Harley Benton fuzz wasn't a piece of shit. It's like honestly, that's like the best way I get to describe it. That's one of the modes. It's like super, super fuzzy and just like you can feel it. Like it really does. Like it kind of lives up to the name of like, the cat with the hair standing up on it when it's scared. Oh, dude, it's gross.
I mean, that's exactly what I need. Like we kind of talked about this on last podcast, but like a lot of what I'm looking for with those kinds of sounds is like, I already laid down a sick sounding rhythm track, right? And it's just like, it's thick and it sounds huge, but like I need something on the top end to like fill some space. And like sometimes you can only do that with shit that's pulling out weird noises, like a fuzz, or like, you know, sometimes some of the layers we did, I have the Boss, the Octave, the new one, the OC5, and like, you know, you throw a +2 and a +1 on it, and you know, and then the bottom 1 and 2 as well, and you just get this really weird sounding thing before a bunch of distortion that like fills some frequency space that, you know, wasn't being filled by anything else. And sometimes you just need pedals that can do that. Like I don't need that for every day. It doesn't live on my board and go, you know, out live with me, but I need it for some weird times where I'm like, I just need a sound, you know?
Yeah, that's the cool thing that I'm finding, except on the other end of the spectrum. And I find that now with time-based effects and modulation effects. I'm finding for adding in those little things over the top or in the background, I really like weird sounds now, like a lot more. And I think the reason they turned me off for a while is because we definitely talked about this a few weeks ago, maybe even a few months ago. The reason why I don't add like a ton of guitar tracks is because I always wanted to be able to recreate it live, right? But now that like I'm really opening up and like I don't want to limit myself when I'm recording. I want to be able to do things that I can't necessarily do because, you know, you're not going to be always able to do it anyways live the same ways. So I'm finding these like really weird effects pedals are the ones I'm like really, really, really into. I love this Earthquaker Devices Astral Destiny. I got to make a video on it this week. I've had this thing for like a month and a half. And I haven't sold it, so that should say something. But I haven't. I've had so many other things that I've been playing with, but it's so cool. And then the other thing that I really want to try is the Rainbow Machine. Have you ever heard of that pedal? That thing is the craziest. I don't even know how to describe that. It's like a bad LSD trip, but you could also like tame it so it sounds kind of like a really, really old school chorus as well. It is like, it's a pedal that's definitely still on my wish list. I've wanted it for like 3 years, but I've been like, you're going to buy it. You're going to use it for like a day and then you're never going to use it again. But I think now I've grown to the point where I'm like, I could see myself finding spots for this.
Yeah. I have a hard time with the, you know, above $200 pedals too, where they're just like, man, they got to really be workhorses. And I also kind of have a hard time with like time-based effects personally, because most of my stuff is in the studio, right? Where it's like, I don't like printing, you know, time-based stuff because I want to be able to mess with it later. And, you know, I'm just not in a workflow where I print, you know, any of the time-based stuff on a separate track. Like with it's just too much work to do both of those things, right? So I'd either have to figure out how to do them at the same time and then separate the signal, or I'd have to do everything twice and then do it through the time base so that I could, you know, be able to mess with the mix of the two. And I don't know. I mean, the more as I've gotten older and gotten into pedals, I've thought about kind of how can I remedy this problem and like set myself up a decent sort of, I don't know, maybe like an insert send or a reamp send of some kind that I could send through pedals and some outboard stuff that would make it like not a hassle to do so that I would get into them more. But like, I don't have shit for time-based effects. I have like a really crappy reverb and a really crappy delay that just like work for live because I don't care that much. And it's purely because of the studio stuff. And it's like, so for me, like, I think the Rainbow Machine sounds really cool. And I've seen some really cool videos where they show some crazy sounds that I don't think I'd ever use, but are amazing. But like spending $230 on a pedal that like I'm going to not use in the studio and probably use occasionally live is just like, I can't do it.
I think that you should be looking at the Strymon stuff then for what you're talking about, because if you were to use it after the fact, you can use it in stereo. And you could do so much cool stuff after you've already laid down the track. I mean, you know, you work smart. You just you have your DI signal going in with your other signal. And then if you want to play with the time base after the fact, it's not hard to route that and have it go to either a timeline, a volante, a big sky, any of those kind of really cool Strymon time-based pedals. They are so good and you could just get so creative.
Yeah. I'm just like, you know, we've always had this in the box mentality where it's like, I just pull up a delay, I can mess with any piece of it after the fact and stop thinking. And you know, what's funny is I say that I'm going to do that, like as if I change all these things afterwards, but I pretty much always just pull up the same delay and set it and forget it. So like, I really shouldn't. It's really more about the fact that I never think about like, oh, I've reamped, I want to reamp again with a time-based effect and lay that down. It's just like, it's another step. So I never really think to do it. You know what I mean?
I do understand what you're saying. It's just like, I don't want one other thing that I have to do.
Dude, our time is the most valuable thing at this point. Like, everything is about efficiency and speed, you know? Like, if I got to do a whole new step just for a delay, or I can pull up a plugin and it's already done, it's tough to argue with one versus the other.
Or you could do what I do and just, I know this is a very difficult word for a lot of people, and especially you who's a major tweaker, you commit. You just commit. You record it as it is, and you're like, I'm done. This is great. This sounds great. And you make the damn thing work.
There has never, ever been a scenario where I've had printed time-based effects that I didn't go, I need more of that now that I'm in a full mix. And then you can't do anything about it. There's nothing you can do except add another one and hope that it doesn't interfere. I will agree. I should definitely add the extra step and add some time-based stuff in, but I'm never going to print beforehand. This is never going to happen.
I do it all the time, and I'm just happy with my results. Thank you very much. But
well, agree to disagree.
No, I mean, I understand. And it's funny because it just shows like we both value time. We both have our own workflows, and we both don't want to do unnecessary secondary steps. So you have your way of doing it where you'll have the plugin. You'll look at it like that, like, oh, it's not a big deal. Like, I already have a sound that I like, so why would I fuss with anything? I look at it like, look, I already dialed this in. I love how this sounds out of my amp. It's going to work. And I record it.
Yeah. And then you've just convinced yourself, and in my case as well, it does work no matter what. No matter what the final result is, it works.
And at the end of the day, all we're doing is we're saving ourselves time. We both are doing it in just different methods. I find that funny.
Yeah.
So we're talking about digital stuff. You wanted to talk to me about a new digital piece of gear that you've had for a little bit. You want to give me your thoughts on it, Mr. Headrush guy?
Mr. Headrush guy. Actually, you can kind of, wrong way. You can see it in my frame right here. And I mostly want to talk about this because we actually talked about the reason that I bought this on one of the podcasts previously, right? So I brought up the question, what do you think about the idea of a 3-piece band without amps, right? Like, because that was kind of what we were thinking about doing here for a little bit for a live situation, right? And, I think your feeling on it was like, nah, you got to do the amps, and I get that, and we talked about it for a while, and I'm not ready to give up the convenience of the stomp and all the digital stuff. And for me, I think the main reason is just because I really don't like using pedals while I'm singing at all. Like, I want to literally just be able to sing and play guitar and not think about anything else. Like, so for us, we have everything programmed out through MIDI. Like, the lights are synced. We've got backing tracks. We've got MIDI commands going to all of the stomps and everything, changing all the channels and everything, but like, I also want that kind of in the room big amp sound, right? So we thought as a middle ground, what might be kind of cool would be to grab the head rushes and try something like that. So my bassist was actually already had 2 of the 12 inchers that he was using just for practice, right? With his HX stomp. So and then we were like, all right, we'll throw them on stage so that you can have some stage level, right? So we decided I'd grab 2 of the 108s and we could do a stereo rig, so one 12 and one 8 on both sides of the kit, doing the bass and the guitar. And I really actually very impressed by this. I'm kind of, I was surprised, right? Like, I think we've all kind of thought about the whole like digital amp thing or whatever, and it's like, it never really is gonna, you never think it's going to sound as good as it's going to sound, and I was very, very surprised, especially at the price. I picked one up used for under $200, and it's got a ton of low end, so much so that I had to roll some off, which is crazy. And it was impressively loud. It's like 2,000 watts or something, which is insane. And I think it'll give at least enough of that idea that there's amps going on and a big band happening, and then I can also feed front of house with DI outputs and everything too,
It makes sense from a workflow standpoint. And I understand that your workflow is so specific and you have certain needs as a singer and as a guitar player when you're performing live. And I get all of that. And I think it's really good that you're going to be able to have stage volume, because that's something I don't think I could ever play a gig without that. Like any gig. It doesn't matter if it's like, even just me playing with my wife with just like a little, like a combo amp, like I use the Black Star sometimes for stuff like that. I have to have stage volume. I could never do it. My playing would suffer so bad. Even when I'm like doing demos, when I was using the Quad Cortex and doing it like that with just my headphones on and tracking all the demo stuff, like I felt like I wasn't as into it because I didn't have the volume in the room. There's something about like a good quality pushed sound, whether it is digital or not, I will give you that is like, it's important to have.
Agree. I track usually over the monitors and I have them cranked for that exact reason. There's something about like it not feeling live or like you're not like there kind of doing it over headphones and sort of a tiny model back. And it's not the best way, you know, like I don't love doing the loud over the monitors, but it works enough for me to feel like, you know, I'm really playing into it. So I get that for sure.
Yeah, and it's really difficult with headphones. I find myself struggling the most. With practice, I don't mind it. It's really convenient, especially late at night. And it is all about being able to not annoy people, and in our cases, not wake up children. But, I mean, man, I hate just digitally doing everything and digitally having it come through my headphones. I can't get behind it. I can't do it personally, but I get it. It makes sense. And that's really cool. The one thing that you didn't mention there that you mentioned to me before, and I want you to talk a little bit more on, you mentioned your bandmate had the 112. You have the two 8-inch speakers, and you were commenting on how surprised you were at how full they sounded for 8-inch speakers.
Yeah. I was kind of amazed. Like, it's a little woofy for sure on the low end, but it's still an impressive amount of bass. I mean, I literally I went in because I just popped the stomp in to see how it was going to sound, kicked up like my main tone and started going on, and I was like, holy shit, this is way too much bass. I mean, I rolled all the way up to like 250 on a low cut, and it cleaned right up, which is fine, but like I don't know why you would ever want all that, like, you know, clearly like 100 rumble that's going on. It just was too much. But the fact that it's there and I have to take it away is so much better than it not being there and having to make up for it somewhere else.
Yeah, you can't add it back as easily.
No.
And I know that firsthand from using a lot of small tube amps with 8-inch and 10-inch speakers. You do sacrifice the low end. You get that clarity in the cut in the mix, which is what I want the majority of the time. But in an instance where you want a little more bottom end, you have to make it up in the DAW. And that's not something that I really like, because even if you use an EQ pedal to do it, the speaker doesn't normally handle it in an ideal fashion. So it's not exactly a sound that I would really like anyways.
No, and I mean, even in the DAW, if it's not there to pull from, you have nothing to add it with. You can't create sound out of nothing. If the speaker isn't recreating the low end for you to bump, you can't bump it. You know?
Yeah, but in the DAW, you can at least add you can add another plugin to kind of fake it a little bit. It's kind of like what you were talking about with drum overheads. You can kind of artificially put it in there, but it's better to just not be in that situation to begin with, or just, you know, use the right tools for the right job.
Yep. Yeah. I honestly, I don't think, you know, I only considered this obviously because it's essentially a tiny PA speaker that's like got a flat enough EQ that it can model an IR, and it's the only reason I would consider anything at 8 inches. For me, like, I've never really heard I've never really heard an 8-inch speaker, I think, that doesn't sound like an 8-inch speaker, right? And like, it's just never enough low end for me. But and I was a little bit worried about it with this and thinking like, oh, if I can't get it out of it, I'll just, you know, pony up and get the 12-inch. And I'm not worried about it at this point. I think now more what I'm, you know, what I think is going to be work ahead of us is me and Dan sitting down and kind of working out tones between the two different size speakers, making sure that like we're cutting off at the right places, so we're not just like all on top of each other in the high end, you know?
I do not envy that situation at all. I really don't. I'm so happy that, like, I don't know. I come from the school of thought where I don't need to do that because I'm the only guitar player. But like that would annoy me, because it's just like I dial in a tone at home, it sounds great, and then I show up at practice and my bandmate's clashing with me, and then we have to get into the technicalities of frequencies, changing our EQs. Fuck that. I don't want anything to do with that.
I mean, it's happened plenty of times in the old school way too, where like, you know, I remember back in the day when I was using the crate amp And I think Justin had like a line 6 half stack, and like they sounded like shit together, you know. And you got to be like, all right, how do we like kind of make this work a little bit? And then, you know, as we got older and we had nicer amps, it was a little bit easier. But even still, like a lot of the times, you know, for his lead stuff when he was doing shit, we'd have to be like, you need mid bumps, or like I can't hear anything you're doing, you know. And it's part of it. It's part of playing with, you know, more so other guitarists than other bassists. But now as we're doing the 3-piece thing or whatever, and it's like, hey, you got to have this huge chorus tone. Like Dan will do stuff with octave pedals and, you know, and stuff above and lots of fuzzes and shit. And like that stuff's got to work with my tone too, you know?
Yeah, I get it. I was laughing. You couldn't see me, but I was laughing because that crate sounded so much better than the Line 6.
Oh yeah. He totally bought the Line 6 because it was like $300 for, you know, a half stack. Like, that's why everybody bought them. It was the fucking Spider, you know? I mean, they're terrible amps. They sounded awful. But yeah, the crate, the magic crate, which I keep thinking about, I think I'm going to rip the head out of it and turn it into a head at some point. But it's magic. I don't know what it is about it.
It's just, his whole rig at that point in time was the most stereotypical thing I've ever seen. It was the Line 6 half stack and then the Schecter C1, right?
Yep. And no pedals because we didn't do pedals back then. So, yep, just a straight up Schecter C1 into a Line 6 Spider half stack. It was loud.
Yeah, it was loud and it was a tone. It was definitely a tone there. It's just funny because there's not many things that show like that there is definitely a little bit of an age gap between us. That's one of them. Like, because at my age at that point, like that wasn't like the thing, you know what I mean? But I remember seeing it everywhere. Yeah, everywhere.
Everyone had them. Yeah. But I mean, they just hit that like perfect market where there was I think it must have been like an uptick in guitar new sales or whatever. And they like hit the perfect price point where it was like, look at all these cool tones you get with all of these knobs, and it's only like $200 and it's so loud, you know, and like it does insane. So like if your kid's into System of a Down, he'll think it's really cool, you know. I don't know, man. Everybody had them. It was like you couldn't. And let's say everybody who stopped playing guitar also had them. Like you go to people's houses and they would just like be in their room next to a Squire, you know, and like they've never played it. They're like, oh, I got it for Christmas or something. Like they were just everywhere. I would love to see numbers on Line 6 Spider 2 sales.
Well, I'm sure you could ask Philip McKnight and he would give you them off the top of his head.
Yeah. I mean, I don't care about accuracy. I just care about numbers.
That's my point. But I mean, but what's funny to close that train of thought, when I was at that age, gigging, well, not at that age, I was a little bit younger, but when it was like the really popular phase of when I was playing out around that era, for me, it was either people played Blues Juniors or they played JCMs. And the people that had the JCMs, it was working maybe 1 out of 4 gigs. And then they would be using some sort of cheap stand-in amp to play the gig with because the JCM was getting repaired.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, I don't remember seeing the JCMs as much as I saw everybody had a Blues Junior or some version of the, you know, like Fender 50-watt combo.
The Hot Rod, the Hot Rod Deluxe.
Yeah. I had actually, I think around when Justin bought the Spider, I bought the Vox's version, which was the Valvetronics, which I actually still have, and is actually a decent little amp. Also incredibly cheap for a half stack. I still have the cabinet too. I've been trying to get rid of it for like a decade now, and nobody wants it. But the head's okay. Like the distortion channels are meh, you know, like they're real 2000s digital. But the clean models are pretty decent. Like, and they got the 15 and the 30, and like, you know, just for like kind of shits of a solid state version. It's got a preamp tube in it too, actually, I think.
Yeah.
They're not that bad.
I had one of those too. It had a 12AX7 preamp tube in it. Yeah. Is yours the one with the metal face on it that looks like it's ready to grate some cheese?
It is, yeah. You know what's weird though is like, so I think that a bunch of people who were playing heavier stuff bought them, and then they did a second round that was like heavier focused and had more heavy amps in it. I have the first round that doesn't have as many heavy ones in it, but it doesn't look as metal as the second round does. I guess I don't know.
That's really funny. I miss those amps. It just brings me back to, just a younger time in my life. Having a few of those. That was one of my first endeavors into the digital era, and it didn't last long. I think I bought it because my Music Man wasn't with me, and I didn't want to. I was like, well, I already have a really good amp. Why would I buy a second really good amp? I'll just buy a cheap practice amp, and then I'll use my 11 rack. I never used the 11 rack. And yeah, the little practice amp probably was turned on maybe 4 or 5 times. But then I bought the amp that I ended up selling you, which is the AC4.
Yeah, and that thing is awesome. Actually, amazingly, this is the first record that it's not on. I do really love that amp, but the bass breaker came in clutch this album. And like our clean song, or our cleaner song.
Our clean song.
It's probably like 60% clean and like 40% heavy. But I ended up using the bass breaker for both the clean and the heavy parts. The bass breaker sounds awesome. It's like that perfect like 90s, right in between heavy and like edge of breakup sound kind of a thing. Like it's real grungy in a really cool way. And normally I would have gone to the Vox for that, and I didn't, just because I wanted to play around with the bass breaker, and I know it's not the Fender tone because it's a bass breaker, but it's the closest thing I have to a Fender tone, and that's kind of what I wanted, so it worked out. But I do love that Vox. It's a great amp, and it's been a lot of stuff. And I will say, like, pushing that thing super hard with a drive sounds great for heavy stuff too. I just don't often get to play with it in that way.
I think it's funny that we started this conversation talking about how we were surprised the Optimist could get us into that kind of 90s aggressive rock tone, and we've come full circle to how that bass breaker did the same exact thing.
Yeah.
That's all I have tonight, Dave. You got anything else? This is gonna be a rough edit because we've been having bad internet issues. Obviously, you guys watching this are not gonna know this, but
or maybe you will. Who knows how bad it is, right? You might be able to tell.
You may well, because there's times where I'm nodding and I don't hear anything where Dave was talking, and it was just his mouth moving and the connection dropped. So this is gonna be fun. But I mean, overall, I did enjoy this one. This was cool to kind of just keep it to a few little topics. We did kind of go on our little tangent when it came to the amps, but we can't help ourselves at times. If you got anything else, Dave, now's the time.
I don't, and there's no way we can wrap up any succincter than we did.
Beautiful. All right, so before I mention anything else that Dave will find a way to talk more about, or to get me to talk more about, thank you guys for watching. Tomorrow we are unboxing the new guitar that I got to replace one of the guitars I really, really regretted. I'm really, really excited about that. I hope you all tune in and check out to see what that is. But that's all for this. Take it easy. Have a good rest of your day.